Hello everyone. Tonight we are stepping through the glass doors of a place that does not exist anymore, Storterio Kitchen, in the winter of 1950s American department stores. In Taipei by hour, how one ordinary woman's day at a kitchen table holds pride, fatigue, tenderness, thrift, and an entire hidden world. So settle in. Let the blanket come up a little higher. Let the room around you grow softer at its edges. If these quiet journeys into ordinary lives are something you return to, you are very welcome to subscribe and come back on another night, when another small door from the past will open for you. And if you feel like leaving a comment about where in the world you are listening from, please do. There is something genuinely lovely about knowing how many different rooms can share the same hush at the same hour. Now let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow a little. We're going somewhere quiet tonight. Outside, it is still dark over southern Ontario in the winter of 1960. Snow has been falling on and off for days. Not in dramatic heaps, not in the storybook drifts that arrive in a single night and transform everything by morning, but in the steady, practical way snow often falls in this part of the country. Enough to crust the front steps and soften the fence posts and build a hard grey ridge where the plough has already passed the end of the street once this week. The town is small enough that you know who lives in the brick house at the corner, and who keeps hens behind the lane, and whose boy delivers the evening paper on a bicycle when the roads allow it. At night, the whole place seems to draw inward, every lit window holding its warmth close, every porch light putting up a small argument against the dark. By morning, the town is pale and breath-held and waiting. You wake before anyone asks you to. That is how the day begins in this house. Not with an alarm, not with noise, but with a kind of inner knowledge that sits beneath sleep, like a stone beneath shallow water. An internal clock wound by habit and duty, and the accumulated wisdom of years spent managing a household that will not manage itself. Beside you, the room is cool. The blanket holds one last pocket of warmth around your legs, and for one brief second, you are almost still enough to imagine staying there. But the furnace clicks somewhere in the house. A small metallic, perfectly ordinary sound, and the pipes give one quiet tick in the wall, and you already know the kitchen is waiting. When your feet find the floor, the chill rises through your soles at once. You dress by memory more than sight. A housecoat, slippers worn at the heel, hair pinned back just enough to be decent. The hallway beyond the bedroom door is dim, holding that peculiar winter smell of an older Canadian house. Furnace heat, a little dusty wool, drying on a hook somewhere, the faint mineral scent of cold glass pressed against cold air on the windows. In the front hall, yesterday's boots sit on the rubber mat with a dried salt ring around them like a watermark. A pair of children's mittens hangs clicked to a line near the register, not quite dry yet from yesterday's adventure in the snow. Then you reach the kitchen. Even in the half-dark, it feels like the true center of the house. The linoleum gives slightly under your feet, that soft familiar give of a floor that has been lived on for years. The curtains at the window over the sink are still deep blue with the pre-dawn light that is not quite light yet. The chrome-edged table stands in the middle of the room, plain, dependable, already seeming to hold the shape of the day before anyone has touched it. It is not an elegant table. It is not a table anyone would photograph for a magazine or display in a department store window. It is chrome-legged and laminate-topped and wiped down so many times that the surface has a faint softening at the edges, where the cloth has passed most often. But it is solid and easy to clean, and hard to ruin, and it is familiar in the way a handrail is familiar, so constant in its presence that you stop truly seeing it until you try to imagine the room without it. You reach for the kettle first. In a moment, there will be steam condensing against the cold window glass, and the sound of a teaspoon against a ceramic cup, and the first small promise of warmth moving through the house from this room outward. But for now, there is only the click of the burner catching in your own movement in the quiet kitchen. One cupboard opened, one spoon drawer pulled, one enamel canister lifted and set down. It is a room that asks for touch. The tin bread box, the smooth ceramic of the flour jar, the waxed paper in its cardboard box, The cool chrome edge of the chair pulled slightly back from the table. Even in silence, you are already arranging the morning, and the table waits with its particular kind of patience to receive each thing you bring. Cup cereal bowls, the toast rack, the lunch paper, the small folded grocery list you have been adding to since yesterday afternoon when you noticed the tea tin was getting light. This is where your life happens in 1960, not in speeches, not in headlines, not in the grand public language that people reach for when they want to describe a country as though it were made only of railways and parliaments and the broad strokes of political maps. Your life is here at this kitchen table in a modest house on a cold street, in a small Ontario town, where the winter boots develop leaks every February without fail, and the grocery money must be stretched in ways that take quiet skill, and the curtains need taking down and washing, and the children need feeding every single morning as though they had not been fed the morning before. The whole ordinary machinery of family life must keep running, and the running of it falls to you, and you make it run so smoothly and so invisibly that on the best days it almost seems to run itself. That invisibility is exactly why it matters, because the table is never only a table. Not in a house like this, not in a life like this. By noon it will have been a desk, a cutting board, a folding station, a place to sit with a cup of tea and not quite rest. By late afternoon it will be buried under school books, damn mittens, a half-eaten banana, a spool of thread, and at least one person's complaint about arithmetic. By evening it will become the stage on which a good supper must somehow appear, no matter what was on special at the grocer this week, and no matter how tired you are by then. And late at night, after everyone else has drifted off to the other rooms of the house, it will stand bare again under its small overhead light, and the whole day's effort will have been folded back into its clean, wiped surface as though it had asked nothing at all. So tonight, that is where we will stay. Not in all of Canada, and not in every kind of life the country holds in 1960. We will stay here. In one small Ontario kitchen with snow banking up outside the window, and a radio in the next room that speaks softly when it is turned on, and school boots by the back door, and a grocery list tucked under the sugar bowl, and a woman already moving through the pre-dawn dark with a purpose so habitual it has become almost like breathing. The kettle is beginning to think about singing. You can hear it, the faintest trembling below a boil, that first whispered suggestion of steam. You stand at the counter and look out the window over the sink past the frosted edges of the glass, where condensation has frozen in small feathered formations, and beyond them you can just make out the backyard, the clothesline standing empty and stiff in the dark, the old fence wearing its white cap of snow, the garden buried so completely under winter that by spring it will require a kind of faith to believe anything was ever planted there. In another hour there will be tire tracks on the street and children's voices carrying in the cold and the sound of shovels scraping along concrete up and down the block. The neighborhood will wake and become itself again, social and particular and full of the small visible signs by which people read one another's circumstances. But not yet, for this one brief pocket of morning, before the house claims you fully. The kitchen belongs only to your hands, and the sound of the kettle, and the slow strengthening of the light beyond the glass. You set the first cup down on the table, and with that small motion, the day begins. By the time the kettle sings properly, you are already halfway into the real work of the morning. It never arrives all at once. The morning, it gathers. First the tea, then the toast, then the lunches to be assembled. Then the voices in the hallway as the house begins to surface from sleep. Then the chairs pulling against the linoleum. Then the sudden acceleration that makes 8 o'clock feel as though it leapt from nowhere while your back was turned. The kitchen light is on now, turning the room from blue to warm gold. The chrome trim of the table catches it. The oilcloth pad beneath the sugar bowl shows a faint crack at one edge where it has worn thin from use. You place the cups where they always go, not because anyone assigned those positions, but because that is how order survives in a small, busy house. A family has territories at a table just as surely as they have territories in the rest of the world, and knowing those territories, honoring them without being asked. is part of what keeps mornings from fraying before they have really begun. Here is your husband's place, where he can reach the folded newspaper if it has already been thrown onto the step. Here is the child who eats slowly and must be reminded twice. Here is the one who talks before properly swallowing. And here, this space where you stand more often than sit. This belongs to the morning's work. Through the doorway you hear the muffled thud of feet overhead. A drawer opens in a bedroom. Water runs briefly in the bathroom pipes. The house is waking in pieces and stages, but the kitchen already feels fully alive. It smells of toast and wet tea leaves, and the colder edge of air that comes each time the back door is opened. A crack to shake out the mat, or bring in the milk boffies from the step. If you are lucky, the furnace has kept up properly through the night, and the room is comfortable before anyone enters it. If not, there is that sharp quality to the air that makes everyone linger too long over socks and shoelaces, and reasons to stay near the register for just another minute. You move around the table quickly now. Lunches first, because lunches are the one part of the morning that cannot be postponed to the last minute without it showing. Wax paper pulled from the box and laid out flat. Bread set in pairs, perhaps egg salad today, or jam or whatever cold meat was left from yesterday's supper that can be sliced thin enough to look more generous than it truly is. An apple. If the apples have kept well, a biscuit wrapped in paper, if biscuits survive the evening untouched. And you judge this to be the sort of day that can afford a small sweetness. The lunchboxes wait open on the table with their particular dented personality. Metal latches worn smooth from years of small fingers. A faint smell of metal and orange peel, and the honest mustiness of indoor winter things. They will go out into the cold morning and return in the afternoon, scuffed and sticky and needing to be rinsed before the smell turns into something you would rather not investigate. The children arrive in layers of half-obeying clothing, hair that has not fully submitted to the brush. Cheeks still flushed from sleep. School clothes pulled on in the wrong order in dim bedrooms. They are noisy in the way that only a winter morning kitchen can contain without breaking. That particular concentrated volume of a family in a small room when the outside world is still cold and silent. One child wants more jam than is being offered. One cannot find the mate to a mitten that was definitely left somewhere visible last night. One announces with the specific triumphant tone, children reserve for news they know will be interesting, that a teacher said there might be skating after school if the yard ice is judged safe. You answer. You direct. You hand and wipe and correct. Sit properly. Finish the egg. Where is your scarf? Not that sweater, the thicker one. It is February. No, you may not leave your overshoes in the classroom again. The note came home about that already. The porridge is hot enough. You may stop blowing on it. The bus does not wait. These phrases have the rhythm of something rehearsed, but they are not performance. They are the verbal machinery of a household being launched into the cold world from this one warm room. And all of it happens around the table. That is the quiet genius of a room arranged this way. The whole family is sorted and fed and corrected and comforted and launched from one central surface. Homework, that should have been packed into the satchel last night, is discovered there this morning under yesterday's library book, and hurriedly shoved in with one corner bent. A permission slip appears, folded twice and suspiciously damp, offered without eye contact. Signatures are needed. Lunch money changes hands. A child drops a spoon and picks it up off the linoleum, and you say put that in the sink and get a clean one, and the child does so with the exaggerated suffering of the truly put upon. It is all ordinary. It is all essential. You know things about your children at this table that you do not know anywhere else. You know who is avoiding the porridge for reasons of conscience, and who has genuinely lost their appetite. You know by the pace of chewing whether someone is anxious about the day ahead. You know by the sound of a chair being pushed back whether the morning is proceeding smoothly, or beginning to unravel at one of its quieter seams. You know by the particular way a child holds their cup, whether there is something unsaid waiting for a gentler moment. This reading, this constant calibration, happens beneath the ordinary surface of the breakfast hour. invisible to the children and perhaps even to your husband, but never absent. Outside, through the kitchen window, the town is waking with you. A neighbor's porch light is still on, burning unnecessarily now that the sky is lightening. Smoke rises from a chimney, 2 houses down, and lies low in the cold air instead of climbing, which means the temperature is not going to improve much before noon. Somewhere farther down the street, a car refuses to start on the first turn of the key, and you hear the engine turning and groaning before catching, and feel something almost like sympathy for it. The snowplow has been through already. Its work shows in the dirty brown grits pressed into the road surface and the new height of the snowbanks at the curb. In this country, in this season, the weather is not background. It enters every room. It shapes how long the mittens take to dry and how much soup makes sense for supper and how close everyone stands to the register without quite meaning to lean against the wall. Your husband comes in from the bedroom looking shaving lotion clean, a newspaper under his arm if the delivery boy has already made it to the step. He sits and the table changes again. It's not only a school launch station now. It becomes the morning's first place of adult exchange, not grand discussion. Rarely anything that could be called a conversation in the formal sense, but the kind of brief practical mapping of the day that a household depends on and a marriage accomplishes in shorthand. He mentions the roads. You mention that the milk is nearly out and the milkman comes tomorrow. He says he may be late this evening, a meeting after hours. You say there is enough stew to reheat without trouble. He says he saw Lawson's boy shoveling the corner walk before school, good lad. You say yes. All of it is small. All of it is load-bearing. Then departure begins. It happens in surges. Coats are lifted from hooks. The good ones for school, the everyday ones for work. Overshoes are fought with near the back door, the closures on the children's boots stiffening in the cold. Wool scarves are wound around lower faces until only eyes show. Someone has lost a glove in the 5 minutes since they last saw it. Someone steps in the wrong overshoe and must start over. The back door opens and a real draft sweeps across the linoleum floor and makes everyone hunch a little, and in that moment the kitchen sends them out, into the dark bright morning, the hard snow, the world that exists beyond this table. You stand at the door for a moment. The last child turns at the gate, waves, walks on. The street absorbs them all. Your husband's car starts more willingly than the neighbours down the block. The front door closes with its heavier adult sound. A delivery truck passes slowly at the corner. A church bell in the distance marks the hour with a sound so familiar you hear it without quite listening to it. And suddenly the kitchen is still again, though not in the same way it was before dawn. This is a used stillness, a post-people stillness. There are crumbs on the table. There is a marmalade knife resting on a saucer. A damp ring where a mug stood on the laminate, a chair pushed out at an angle that no one thought to fix when they left. Evidence everywhere of the family that has just passed through like weather. You stand at the table for a moment and look at what remains. This part of the morning goes unpraised because it looks so simply ordinary. The wiping down, the rinsing, the gathering back into order. But this is where the house finds its shape again, after the turbulence of sending everyone off. Your hand moves the cloth in practiced arcs across the chrome edge and the laminate surface, and with each pass the table becomes available again, ready for its next purpose. The breakfast disappears. The day opens. Already it is becoming yours again. Once the breakfast things are cleared and the last lunch box has gone out the door, a quiet settles over the kitchen that is very different from peace. It is useful quiet. Working quiet, the kind that lets you hear the clock over the stove marking each minute, and the furnace cycling on in the basement, and the far-off scraping of someone's shovel from the house. 2 lots over, the house is not empty of need. It is simply empty of witnesses. You rinse the cups, stack the plates in the drainer, and return to the table almost at once, because the table is where the rest of the day must be decided. A woman's morning in 1960 is often built from small arithmetic that no one else sees performed. not the arithmetic of offices and bank ledgers. Though that world exists somewhere beyond the end of your street, yours is an arithmetic of a different and arguably more complicated kind. Butter soap powder school socks. Potatoes bus fare a birthday card for a child's classmate. Cough medicine from the drugstore, the school milk money due on Friday. And the larger question that runs beneath all of it, whether the butcher's cheaper cut can be coaxed by patience and a slow oven into something tender enough by 6 o'clock. You sit down with the grocery list. It is not a formal list on proper note paper. It is almost never that. It is a slip, torn from the edge of an envelope, or the clean side of an old bill with items added in different hands. Sometimes pencil from the kitchen drawer, sometimes ink from the telephone table pen, and in different moments and different moods. Some entries in your handwriting, neat. Some in haste, when a child announced at dinner that there was no more blue for school tomorrow. You smooth the paper flat on the table with the heel of your hand, a small gesture that suggests you believe tidiness of form might improve tidiness of outcome. Then you open your purse, coins first, laid out where you can see them. Then the folded bills, softened at the folds from being folded and refolded many times. Money for groceries in a house like this is not abstract currency. It has texture. It has history. It is the money that remained after rent and hydro and the coal account and the children's school fees and the irregular small emergencies that accumulate without warning through a winter. You know, before you count, roughly what the week can hold. A roast, probably not this week. Extra fruit, perhaps only if it is looking especially sound. And the price has not crept up again. A magazine from the rack at the drugstore. No, not this week, though you will stand at the rack longer than you should before putting it back. The kitchen table becomes your desk. No one calls it that. You would not call it that. But a desk is what it becomes. A surface for small calculation, for the comparing of what is needed against what is possible, for the private negotiations of household management. A pencil appears from the drawer. Perhaps there's an envelope tucked in there with the last few months of receipts from the milkman and the butcher and the school book fund. Things you meant to sort but have not yet found an hour for. You spread these carefully. The sums are not complicated in the mathematical sense, but they matter with a weight that no bank officer would quite understand, because behind each number is not a line item but a family, a child's cold feet, a husband's dinner, the social decency of a house that does not look anxious. Every household has its own quiet thresholds, the point at which soup begins to be stretched with more water than stock, and you hope no one notices the change in colour, the week when the children's socks must be darned again rather than replaced, not because it isn't time, but because the replacing must wait. The decision to hem the old apron instead of spending on a new one when the apron is only worn in this kitchen and will never be seen by anyone whose opinion could matter. The small triumph, felt privately and never announced, of making Thursday's supper look as though it required no particular resourcefulness at all, when in fact it required considerable resourcefulness. Outside the window, the daylight has strengthened to its winter best. Snow on the back fence throws a flat brightness into the room that seems almost generous after the early dark. Steam still clings in a thin, pale cloud to the lower portion of the window glass. The geranium on the sill, if you have managed to keep one alive through the cold months, leans determinedly toward the light. The tablecloth, if today is a tablecloth day, is the practical cotton one, not the good linen kept for company. But you still tug it straight when you sit. You still care how the surface presents itself, that caring is not vanity. It is something closer to dignity, and dignity in a small Ontario town in 1960 is built from exactly these surfaces, the cloth tugged straight when no one is watching, the steps swept before the day is too far along, the curtains hanging with their hems level. Because you know how quickly signs travel. A child goes to school in trousers that have become too short, and it is noticed before you have had a chance to fix it. A husband appears at a church function with cuffs worn thin at the edge, and a glance registers what no one says. A woman appears at the grocer's, clearly counting the coins in her purse before committing to the meat she was already holding, and nothing unkind is said. Nothing is required to be said, because the neighborhood is a reading community and ordinary life is the text it reads most carefully, not with malice. Not usually, but steadily and with an eye long practiced in the detection of slippage, so you plan at the table in a way that is both practical and deeply emotional. You are not merely asking what is needed for the week ahead, you are asking what can be managed without the house beginning to look anxious. You are asking how flour can stretch, how potatoes can be arranged differently over several nights to avoid the appearance of repetition, how a pudding made from simple things can sweeten a lean week's ending and make the supper table feel complete. The kitchen has taught you these tricks of atmosphere over years. You have learned that comfort is partly made of calories and partly made of arrangement and atmosphere. The bread sliced neatly and set in a proper rack. The jam decanted from its commercial jar into a small dish if anyone at all is coming. The good cups used often enough not to seem saved, but not so often that they lose their small distinction. The radio kept at a low and companionable level. The room made to say, without announcement, "We are managing. We are doing all right." Sometimes that is entirely true. Sometimes that is entirely true. Sometimes the week genuinely allows for a little ease. Sometimes there is enough left after necessities for a nice apple or a tin of something that feels slightly festive, or a small piece of fabric from the variety store, because the curtain in the back bedroom has been thinning at the fold for 2 months. But even in the easier weeks, the habit of thrift does not loosen simply because this particular week feels lighter. You still save the bacon fat in the jar on the back of the stove. You still wash and carefully reuse. You still turn yesterday's dinner into today's lunch without announcement. People who have learned thrift from genuine necessity do not stop practicing it in the occasional comfortable week. The reflexes remain. They were earned. You rest your elbows on the table only briefly. Then you straighten again, because there is the route into town to think about, and whether the sidewalks are manageable or whether the overshoes are truly necessary, and whether Mrs. Morth, Hanley from 2 streets over, might be at the grocer at the same time, and whether that is welcome or complicating. You think about what the children are most likely to eat without complaint, which is different from what would nourish them most, and about whether there is enough coal to comfortably finish the month, or whether the furnace needs to be managed more carefully. Then you fold the list and press it into your purse. For a moment your hand rests flat on the table after you stand. The surface is warm where the winter sunlight has reached it, cool in the shadow under the window. So ordinary, so central. A woman could spend half a life leaning over a surface like this, deciding the week's food and the week's spending and the week's small adjustments to the shape of respectability, and still have no one call it knowledge. Yet here, in these morning calculations made in pencil on a torn envelope at a chrome-edged table, the household is kept alive and decent and fed and as safe as it can be made. You take up your coat. The table stands ready behind you, waiting for your return. Going into town in winter is never only going into town. It begins at the coat hooks with layers. The everyday coat, not the good one. Scarf, gloves, boots or overshoes depending on what the morning looks like from the back step, and the back step has been known to look entirely different from the front, the wind coming from a direction that changes everything. Handbag checked once, list, purse, the library book that has been overdue for a week and must go back today, and a small parcel that needs posting if there is time after the grocer. The front door is the true threshold. When it opens, the cold enters all at once and tells you exactly what kind of morning the town is offering. Outside, the light has that particular Ontario winter quality. Hard, white, flat, and in its own way very beautiful. Though beauty is not what you are thinking about as you pull your collar up against it. The snowbanks along the road are no longer fresh. They have the grey, gritty, slightly discouraged look of snowbanks in February, pushed into ridged walls beside driveways and packed hard at the curb where boots and wheels have compacted them into something resembling grey stone. Your breath leaves your mouth in quick, pale clouds, while at your collar catches small airborne grains of blown snow. The street ahead is lined with familiar houses, brick, clapboard, a few newer bungalows, and each one tells a small story in its surfaces. This one has a neatly swept step already. That one still has last night's snow on it. Someone's curtains are drawn still at this hour. Someone's are bright and back and letting in all the light available. You walk carefully. The sidewalks are a mixture. Packed snow, hidden ice, the occasional cleared and salted patch in front of houses where someone has taken particular care. The shopping bag bumps against your leg. If the car is available, you take it, but the car complains bitterly in cold weather, and the heater never catches up until you are almost where you are going. Either way, winter insists on itself. It enters the errand in the ache of your fingers through the gloves when you fumble for change at the counter, in the fog that forms on the shop windows near the door, in the way customers stamp their boots automatically before entering anywhere, as though it is simply good manners toward the floor. The town's main street is not grand, but it understands its own importance. Here is the grocer with hand-lettered specials taped to the inside of the front window. Here is the drugstore with its perfume counter near the door, and its greeting cards in a wire rack and its soda fountain that the teenagers favor after school. Perhaps an A&P, perhaps the independent market, where the produce arrives in wooden crates and the floor near the entrance always has a wet, cold boot sheen no matter how recently it was mopped. Perhaps the dry goods store where you can buy aprons and dish towels and replacement elastic and school stockings without going all the way to the department store in the larger town. The street smells of cold air, gasoline, the bakery's morning output drifting from somewhere nearby, damp wool from people passing, a little coal smoke from an older chimney, still holding to old habits. Inside the grocery store, warmth meets you like a small argument. If you wear glasses, they fog immediately. The floor near the entrance has that particular winter sheen from a morning's worth of melted snow off a dozen pairs of boots. Everyone in here has carried the weather in with them. Red cheeks, damp shoulders where snow has settled and begun to melt in the warmth. The slight stiffness of people who have been outside long enough for it to settle into their joints. And now the list in your purse becomes an instrument of very careful discipline. You do not shop only with appetite and week-ahead planning. You shop with memory and social knowledge. You know which child has entered a sudden and very firm phase of refusing canned peas, which is inconvenient when canned peas are on special. You know which cut of meat, if browned slowly enough in a low oven with half an onion and patience, can be made tender enough to seem like something better than it started out as. You know that tea matters more to the week's functioning than a tin of something fancy, that flour matters more than the biscuit assortment near the front, that a jar of good pickles can make cold leftovers on a Wednesday night feel almost intentional. You know, too, that certain purchases carry public meaning in this community. The biscuits brought to a church afternoon tea, the fruit in the Christmas basket, the kind of coffee you set out when your sister comes from Toronto and you want the kitchen table to look easy, not strained. So you choose carefully, and all the while you are being seen in the ordinary harmless way that people see one another in small towns, which is to say, thoroughly, and without particularly meaning to. Someone asks after the children. Someone remarks that the cold is hanging on this year worse than last. Someone mentions butter has gone up again. Someone glances with no malice and no particular awareness of glancing at what is accumulating in your basket. No one needs to be unkind for this to matter. Ordinary community life is social even when it is quiet, and it remembers what it has seen. At the meat counter, you pause longer than anywhere else. There is a whole education in that pause, in the weighing of price against weight, of bone against edible portion, of the number of mouths at home against the number of meals a single purchase can be stretched across. A roast is not merely a roast in a house like this. It is confidence, or it is strain, or it is Sunday company, or it is a week that has been particularly difficult and deserves rewarding at the table. Today perhaps you ask for something more workable than grand, the stewing beef, or the liver which is cheap and nourishing and not especially beloved by anyone, but gets eaten without too much protest when well seasoned, and the butcher wraps it in white paper with efficient, practiced hands, and says, "Have a good day," and you thank him and mean it, because a butcher who treats you like a customer of standing, regardless of what you are purchasing, is a butcher worth returning to. Then the bag fills, item by considered item. Potatoes, carrots, a tin of tomatoes, bread from the bakery section, still slightly warm through the paper. Tea, soap powder, which takes up room, but cannot be forgotten. Perhaps a tin of fruit for a quick dessert, if the week gets difficult. Perhaps a small something for the children. A paper bag of jelly beans, or a tin of sardines that one of them has recently discovered a passion for. If the money after necessities looks forgiving enough, or perhaps not. Thrift is not only the product of shortage, it is also a discipline that comes from having learned what excess costs later. And the women who practice it most consistently are not always the ones with least. They are the ones who have learned to read a week clearly without wishful thinking. On the walk home, the bags feel heavier in the cold than they did in the store. The handles cut through the gloves a little. The air seems sharper now that you are moving away from the warmth of the shopping street. The houses on your own block appear in front of you with their familiar faces, welcoming and demanding at once. Welcoming because they mean warmth and familiar floors and the particular smell of your own kitchen. Demanding because arriving home means the bags must be unloaded. The coat hung the floor wiped where wet boots have left prints, and supper must already be beginning in the back of the mind even now. The first place the bags land, as they always do, is the kitchen table. And there is genuine satisfaction in that moment. The cold world set down, the purchases made visible. White butcher's paper, brown grocery bags, the dense weight of potatoes in their net, a loaf of bread still cool from the shop, the butter hard from sitting in a cold car even for 20 minutes. The table receives the whole expedition and begins turning it into order. You unpack with a care that is almost ceremonial, because the putting away of groceries is not a lesser task than the buying of them. It is the transformation of raw provision into household possibility. Potatoes to the bin under the counter, carrots to the crisper drawer in the icebox, bread box, butter into the refrigerator, meat to the coldest shelf with this evening already in mind, soap powder up on the high shelf where small hands and accidental water cannot make a mess of it, tea into the canister with its measured satisfaction of the tin being fuller than it was. This is where shopping becomes homekeeping. The groceries have been sorted according to need and perishability, and the invisible schedule of the week's meals that exists, fully detailed in your mind if nowhere else. You think 3 days ahead as your hands move from bag to shelf. The better apple saved for the good lunch on Friday. The bread heel earmarked for toast tomorrow morning. The meat set where it can begin to properly thaw for this evening. These calculations are continuous and embedded so deeply in the work that they feel less like thought than like a kind of domestic instinct, which is what they are: earned instinct, built from years of practice at exactly this table, unpacking exactly this kind of bag. When the last item is put away and the bags are folded and the table wiped of its damp winter marks, the kitchen feels steadier, not abundant, not always, but ready, capable, provisioned for the coming days. You hang your coat. Your gloves lie on the table edge for a few minutes to dry, their fingers still holding the faint shape of your hands. Then even that evidence of the outside world disappears, absorbed into the warmth and the rhythm of the room, and the table is clear again, ready for whatever the afternoon requires. By midday, the kitchen settles into a gentler shape. The morning's urgency has passed. Lunch is packed and delivered, groceries home and stowed, the first round of household tasks either completed or consciously set aside. The long pull of the later afternoon has not yet fully gathered at the edges of the room. There is a pause here, brief and real, in which the kitchen offers something it rarely has occasion to offer, a quality of present tense quiet that belongs almost entirely to you. Not idleness. That would be the wrong word. There are potatoes to peel for later, and the dish towels need changing, and the floor wants sweeping near the back door where this morning's boot traffic left its mark, and somewhere in the house a bed is still sitting with its covers pushed back more than smoothed. The work has not gone away. It has simply redistributed itself, and in the redistribution, it has become possible to move at a slightly different pace. The light across the kitchen table at noon is different from the light of any other hour. It is winter light, flat white, coming from low in the south, catching the chrome edge of the table in a way that makes every crumb and fingerprint and faint cup ring perfectly visible. It is an honest light, not flattering, not theatrical. Honest in the way that midday is honest, unornamented, clear, revealing things as they simply are. The surface of the table under this light is the surface of a table that has been used all morning, held a family breakfast, held budget paper and grocery list, held returning bags, and been wiped between each use, and yet still shows in its minor marks and small worn places the full testimony of daily life. You fill the kettle again. This act, the making of midday tea, matters more than it sounds. And the reason it matters more than it sounds is exactly that it sounds like nothing at all. A woman making herself a cup of tea in her own kitchen in the middle of a winter weekday. What could be simpler? Yet within that simplicity is the rare presence of choice. Not a large choice, not a choice anyone outside this room would mark as significant, but the choice to stop, to put water on, to sit down with the cup when it is ready, to let the steam rise toward your face for a few minutes. This is the daily negotiation between a woman and her own needs, in a life where her needs have a habit of placing themselves at the end of a long queue. You set the cup on the table. Perhaps there is one slice of bread spread with butter and a little sugar sprinkled on top in the old simple way that is more comfort than nutrition and has been a private indulgence since childhood. Perhaps only the tea. You sit in the chair that is most often yours, though no one has formally assigned it, and for a moment the chair receives your weight without asking anything in return. Outside the window, a crow lands on the back fence with a small, decisive thud and surveys the yard with that particular crow composure, as though finding everything predictable and not worth concern. The snow in the yard is undisturbed at this hour, smooth and slightly blue-toned in the winter shadow. A sparrow moves in the bare branches of the lilac near the fence. The world outdoors is quiet in the held-breath way of Canadian winters, not the quiet of nothing happening, but the quiet of everything being very still under very cold air. Here, at last, you can hear yourself think. Not think about supper timing, or the children's state of winter clothing, or whether the hydro bill arrived yet. Think about something without an immediate practical outcome. Think about the letter you have been meaning to write to your sister in Kingston. Think about a dream fragment from this morning that you almost remembered during the breakfast rush. Think about whether the geranium on the sill looks worse than it did last week, and whether something can be done about that, and whether it is worth trying. The radio, if you've turned it on, and sometimes you have, and sometimes you have preferred the silence, fills the room with a particular midday presence. A voice, unhurried, reading something or discussing something. Music between programs. The sound of another human being present in the room through the technology of the age, offering company of a completely undemanding kind. It does not need to be answered. It does not need its feelings considered. It simply speaks or plays, and the kitchen is less empty for it, and you can think around it rather than through it. The table at noon is a gentler companion than the table at breakfast. It asks less performance. No one is watching to see if the lunches look sufficient, or whether the porridge has been properly overseen. No one needs a note signed or a permission slip counted. If a cup ring sits for a minute on the surface rather than being immediately blotted, no consequence follows. The room, for this brief interlude, accepts a slightly looser standard, and the relief of that loosening is out of proportion to its smallness, which tells you something about how tight the standard usually runs, but the solitude is always partial. There is the basket of mending that sits in the corner of the room, containing garments that have made a quiet moral claim on the afternoon. There is the supper that is already being planned in the back of the mind. What time the meat should go in, whether there is enough stock, or whether it must be made from the heel of bread, and the odds of vegetables in the icebox. There is the permission slip that must be remembered, There is the blouse on the chair back with its hem coming loose at one side, noticeable already and certain to become embarrassing if left much longer. Domestic life does not deliver leisure. It delivers intervals within labour. Yet the interval is real. The warmth of the cup against your palms, the steam disappearing upward, the crow departing the fence for some inscrutable crow reason of its own, the clock above the stove marking the quarter hour, the geranium doing what it can in the winter light. The table beneath your forearms solid and familiar, and asking nothing just now. There is something in this brief solitude that functions almost as sustenance, not pleasure exactly, or pleasure only in the most restrained sense, but something more like the moment before a breath that replenishes. The kitchen closes around you in the comfortable way of rooms that know you. Its particular smells, the morning's cooking, the soap, the faint metallic warmth of the heating register, the cool-down coffee if there was coffee this morning, the clean damp of wrung-out dish towels, are smells you have stopped noticing most of the time, except in moments like this one, when the business of the day slows enough to let them register again. A room lived in closely for years becomes an extension of the self in ways that are difficult to articulate and easy to underestimate. Then the spell begins its gentle dissolution. Not all at once. The tea does not suddenly become cold, and the afternoon does not suddenly demand. It is more gradual than that. Your eye falls on the potatoes on the counter and stays there a beat too long. Your hand reaches for the cup and finds it nearly empty. The cook moves. The afternoon begins its reassertion at the edges of the room. You stand. The apron string is retied with the particular firm neatness that signals to the room, or perhaps only to yourself, that the pause has ended and the work resumes. The cup is carried to the sink. The chair is pushed in. The table, briefly a place of rest and ordinary human gathering of self, becomes a work surface again. But something of the noon hour lingers anyway. The warmth where your hands rested, the small quiet of having been, for 20 minutes, entirely yourself in your own kitchen, in a life whose architecture runs toward others, their needs, their schedules, their appetites, their daily requirements for care and food and order. Even that narrow strip of present-tense self-possession is something worth noting, even if no one notes it but you. The afternoon begins to gather at the room's edges. Afternoons in winter reveal what the family is quietly trying to outpace. Morning is for launching, getting everyone out the door and into the day with everything they need. Evening is for gathering, bringing the day back inside, feeding it, settling it, putting it to rest. But afternoon, the long domestic middle, is for maintenance. And maintenance is where ordinary life shows its honest condition most plainly. You bring the mending basket to the table. It is heavier than a glance suggests, not because the clothes are particularly numerous, but because mending carries the accumulated weight of postponement. Each item in the basket represents something that needed attention last week, or the week before, and was set aside in the press of more urgent matters. A pair of socks worn thin at the heel, a shirt missing its second button from the top, a child's mittens split along the thumb seam where the yarn has finally parted under too many snowball throwing sessions, an apron frayed at the pocket corner, school trousers rubbed pale at the knees from the particular method Canadian children employ when sliding on ice, a slip strap shortened and re-sewn once already, now wanting the same treatment again. These are not emergencies. That is precisely why they have been in the basket for as long as they have. In a household where true emergencies are possible at any time, the merely urgent learns to wait. But waiting has its own cost. Small neglects compound. A split thumb seam becomes a ruined mitten. A missing button becomes a shirt that cannot be worn without safety pin. Improvisation which is worse in the community eye than almost any other visible domestic lapse. So the afternoon arrives, and with it the mending basket, and the table becomes what it will be for the next 2 hours. A workshop, flat and well lit and perfectly suited to the spreading out of things that need attention. You settle the basket at one end of the table and draw the lamp close. Thread, needles sorted into their paper packet. The darning egg, smooth, worn. the wooden surface polished by decades of sock-stretched use, a tin of saved buttons, the collecting of which is so deeply habitual that the tin has become almost its own archive of garments past, the bone button from a coat outgrown 3 winters ago, the pearl button from a dress that became a child's dress, and then a doll's dress, and then a rag. Scissors from the kitchen drawer, which know fabric as well as they know paper. Your hands know these tools without needing to search. The work proceeds in the way of repetitive skilled labor. Not quickly, not slowly, but steadily. The needle moves in and out of sock wool with a rhythm that allows thought to run alongside without directing it. This is one of the things domestic needlework has always given women, a legitimate space in which the hands are occupied and the mind may wander or settle, or turn over a problem without being required to come to any conclusion about it. You think about the week ahead, about whether the furnace is running efficiently enough this cold spell, about the letter from your mother that came last week and mentioned her hip again, in the way she mentions things she would prefer you not to worry about, which is to say by mentioning them briefly and then immediately redirecting. You think about a conversation at the grocer this morning that has lodged itself unexplainably. You think about the clothes in your hands too. Clothes, mended closely, become biographical. You can see, in the wearing pattern of a cuff, which child drags that hand through everything. In the blackening at a collar's inner edge, you can read the particular way your husband tilts his head. In the stretched out shape of a stocking heel, you can see the child who walks on her heels even in her sleep. Garments record lives in ways that seem minor and are actually quite precise. They also record economic life. You can see, in the condition of the things in this basket, exactly how far the household money goes and exactly where it runs short. You can see which items have been mended twice before and are being held together by accumulated care rather than original quality. You can see the seams that were turned to extend a garment's life before it was bought by you. These are useful forms of seeing, not sad ones. They tell you where the limits are and how to work within them, because the truth sitting alongside the mending basket is always money, not in a dramatic sense, not in the sense of genuine crisis, of children going cold, of a house in danger, more in the everyday sense of constant management between what is needed and what is available, and the gap between those two things that must be closed by resourcefulness rather than resources. You can buy new when something is truly finished, worn entirely through beyond all help, too small to pass along. But not every time it weakens, so you patch the inside of a knee where the patch will not show. You turn a collar to extend its life another season. You darn because the floors are cold and children need socks, and it would be genuinely foolish not to. These acts are economic in their origin and often something else in their nature, a kind of patience applied to objects, the refusal to accept unnecessary loss. There is a dignity in it if the word is permitted, not a proud, announced dignity, a quiet one, the dignity of making things last, of not letting the house slip, of being the person who noticed the hem and saw to it before the hem announced itself in public. In the community life of a small Canadian town, the line between managing well and not managing is partly drawn at surfaces. The condition of the children's clothing, the state of the curtains, the visible repair or visible neglect of the objects a family sends into the world. You understand this. You have understood it since you were old enough to take in how other households were silently read, and so the mending basket is not only a domestic task, it is also a form of social maintenance, of keeping the families visible, self-respectable in the particular way the community expects of women specifically. Outside, the afternoon sun has begun its early winter retreat. By 3 o'clock, the light through the kitchen window is already thinning toward gold, losing the flat white quality of noon, picking up color and length. Shadows stretch across the backyard. The snow on the fence acquires a faint pink cast. You shift in your chair and pull the lamp closer still. There are more items in the basket than an afternoon usually resolves. There always are, and you will need to leave some for next week. The shirt will be done, the mittens, perhaps one sock. The rest will wait in the patient way of mending, containing themselves. You think, one more, and then begin supper. Then, one more after that. There is a particular satisfaction in restoration that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not practiced it. The mended sock, slipped back onto the darning egg, looking sound and whole again. The shirt with its buttons set exactly to match the remaining ones. The mitten with its thumb seam closed into invisibility. These things will be worn and worn again, and when they are worn, no one will notice the work, which is exactly what the work was meant to achieve. The success of domestic repair is measured by its own disappearance. You shake the threads from your lap, buttons gathered back into the tin, scissors returned to the drawer, needle tucked into its paper, the basket now lighter by several items, though not empty. Never quite empty. The table surface, cleared again, is flour-dusted at one edge from this morning's pastry scraps, marked in pencil at another from the grocery list, faintly tacky at the corner from something a child touched without permission during the afternoon snack. You wipe it with the cloth, and the marks disappear. Outside a sound, a bus perhaps, distant voices. The particular pitch of returning children. The mending is put away. Supper begins its long approach. Children never arrive home from a Canadian winter day in one clean motion. They arrive in weather first and words second. The back door bangs open, always with more force than necessary, as though the cold outside requires a decisive argument to be pushed back, and the hall fills instantly with cold air and noise and the smell of outside, snow and wool and schoolyard, and the specific outdoor winter scent that no indoor thing quite replicates. Mittens come off in awkward jerks. Scarves loosen mid-sentence. Overshoes comp against the mat. Someone speaks at full volume while still half inside their coat, halfway through removing a cap, about something that was unfair or marvelous, or due tomorrow and forgotten. You hear them before you see them. The sound of boots on the back steps is as particular to this house as any sound you know. You can tell by the weight and sequence which child is entering first, whether there are both of them, or only one, whether they are running or dragging, whether the day outside has been kind to them or has extracted a cost. Then the kitchen receives them. Lunchboxes set down on the table with the blunt, definitive sound of small people depositing their day. Satchels dropped near the chairs. School papers emerging from bags, assignment sheets, permission slips. A spelling test folded inward to conceal its grade until a moment can be chosen for revelation. A drawing made in thick wax crayon, its paper rippled from being carried alongside a damp mitten for the better part of the afternoon. A note from a teacher, folded in the way of all school communications that carry something requiring parental response, with a fold precise enough to suggest mild official formality. All of it lands on the table. This is the table's late afternoon character, receiving station, sorting ground, the first domestic surface between the cold world outside and the warmth that the house is meant to provide, and your response to the landing of the day is feeding, because feeding them is always the first answer, the first thing that says the house is working and you are here, and the afternoon has been held in order for them. Not a big meal. Supper is too close for that. Something quick enough to stop the sharpest edge of hunger without spoiling the evening meal. Bread and jam, which requires almost nothing and satisfies almost entirely at this hour. Ginger snaps, if the tin has any left, counted out in your head already. Perhaps a small glass of milk. On a particularly cold day when cheeks are properly reddened and the children's hands are stiff from the walk home, hot cocoa made in the small saucepan. Its smell filling the kitchen with something so ordinary and so comforting that it would require a harder person than most to remain entirely unmoved by it. You know which child needs to be fed before anything else can proceed, and which can talk first. This knowing is not remarkable to you, but it is knowledge earned through years of daily observation, of watching small people move through hunger and cold, and the emotional residue of 8 hours in a world that does not organize itself around their comfort. The child, who goes quiet when hungry, will go quieter and stormier the longer the waiting goes on. The child who becomes loud when tired needs the room to come down several degrees in intensity before questions can be asked that will receive useful answers. You know this, the way you know which burner on the stove runs hot and which window lets in draft in a northeast wind. Sometimes the day they carry back in with them is bright, gold marks on a dictation returned. A teacher who said something publicly kind. The announcement of a class project that involves construction and colour, and the making of something with hands. The prospect of skating on the rink behind the school if the temperature holds and the surface is judged safe this weekend. These reports arrive with the particular energy of children who have found the world outside good today, and the kitchen receives that energy and is briefly lit by it. And you receive it too, the warmth of their good days, which is entirely genuine and costs you nothing to feel. Sometimes the weather report is not good. A glove has been lost on the way home, and its absence is being treated as tragedy. A lunch went uneaten because of some social complication that is described in terms too partial and too emotional to be fully evaluated right now. A teacher said something in front of the class that the child has been carrying home like a splinter for 4 hours and only now producing for examination. Someone else's boots are newer. Someone else's lunch had a store-bought treat. Someone else was not told to share at recess and it was noticed. This is where class enters childhood, not as theory, but as cold reality. The better lunchbox. The newer skates. The birthday party invitation list. The knowledge, assembled from 100 small observations, that some families do certain things and other families do not, and that the doing or not doing has a social meaning that no child can quite name, but all can feel. You listen to these reports at the kitchen table with your particular mixture of tenderness and practicality. Sometimes you explain. Sometimes you splain. Sometimes you say that different families have different arrangements. Sometimes you say that new is not always better, which is true and is also said because it is the thing that needs to be said. Sometimes you simply listen and say very little because the listening is what was needed. You correct as the afternoon progresses too. A coat dumped on a chair rather than hung on a hook is redirected. A satchel in the middle of the floor where someone will fall over it is moved. A child helping themselves to the bread without asking is addressed with the usual language of small household governance. These corrections are not punishments. They are the maintenance of the habits by which the house functions, which is to say, the habits by which a family of people manage to share a small space through a long winter without the space becoming uninhabitable. You know why the coats must be hung, and why the floor must remain clear, and why asking is the practice, even when the answer will certainly be yes. The reasons are practical, and they are also about the formation of people. By now the kitchen has reached its most complicated afternoon state. Bread is being eaten. Someone is doing homework at one end of the table, while someone else is drawing at the other. A mitten is drying near the register. A satchel has been pushed against the wall. The lunchboxes are rinsed and sit on the counter drying. A permission slip has been found and placed in a visible location where it will definitely be signed before tomorrow. The kitchen table is carrying simultaneously the remains of the after-school snack, a half-completed arithmetic exercise, a drawing of a dog, a child's elbow, a library book, the mending basket relocated from its afternoon position, and the first signs of supper preparation beginning at the stove end of the room. Outside the window, the light has gone from afternoon to early evening without pause. In January and February, this transition happens with an abruptness that the body registers before the eye does. A shift in the quality of the cold. A change in the way sound travels in the street outside. The streetlights will come on soon, or have already. Snow in the yard holds a faint grey-blue colour. That means dusk is either here or one short step behind it. Through the kitchen window, the interior of the house is beginning to appear in the glass as a faint reflection. The lamp, the table, the small shapes of children at their work. The room settles toward its evening configuration. Voices lower slightly without being asked. The specific hunger of after school is satisfied and replaced by the quieter waiting of before supper. Someone moves to the living room with a book. Someone stays at the table, not working exactly but present. drawing patterns in the margin of the arithmetic paper in a way that you let pass, because the arithmetic itself is done, and the evening still has room for idleness at its edges. You begin supper in earnest. The kitchen table holds the afternoon and the evening both. It has held the day's end and the day's homework, and the day's cold weather complaints, and the day's small triumphs. It has received the wet mittens, and the lunch boxes, and the school papers, and the crumbs, and the cocoa cups. And now it begins its transformation toward the evening's central purpose, which is to feed the people you love in a room warm enough and ordered enough and full enough that the world outside, cold and long, and in no particular hurry to become spring matters, a little less. That is what the table does, night after ordinary night, in house after house, like this one in this town, and 10,000 towns like it across a winter country. It holds what the day has brought and turns it hour by hour into the shape of a life. In houses like this one, supper does not begin when the family sits down to eat it. It begins hours earlier in decisions made at the meat counter that morning. It begins in the way the afternoon was arranged around what could be ready by 6 without visible strain. It begins in the thawing of the meat, set on the coldest refrigerator shelf before you left for the grocer. It begins in the saving of the bacon fat from last week's breakfast, kept in its small jar on the back of the stove against exactly this kind of evening. By the time the children are home and the kitchen is full again, and the light outside has gone from afternoon to early winter dark, supper is not beginning. It has been underway in your mind since morning, assembling itself quietly behind all the other work of the day. Now it becomes visible. You stand at the table and begin to gather what you need. Onions first, their papery outer skins crackling as you pull them free and drop them into the bowl you keep for scraps. The knife against the board makes its familiar sound. Steady, even, practiced. Carrots next. Their smell bright and cold and earthy. Potatoes, scrubbed rather than peeled when they are young enough to allow it, because peeling means waste, and waste is never simply a kitchen decision in a house like this. A heel of celery. If the bunch has one left, that is still worth using. Perhaps a bay leaf from the small jar in the back of the spice cupboard, which always seems to have fewer leaves in it than you remember buying. If the table has its enamel cutting mat set out, everything happens there. If not, you use the board and draw it close and the table becomes a staging ground anyway. The place where the meal is assembled before it goes to the stove, where each prepared vegetable waits in its bowl or on its square of wax paper, where the morning's meat has been unwrapped and is sitting now in the dish in which it will be browned. The table is not quite the stove and not quite the counter. It is the middle place. The place of the meal in potential, not yet in actuality. The children are at the far end of the table now, quieter than they were an hour ago. The sharpest edge of after-school hunger has been satisfied, and what remains is a softer, more patient waiting. One is moving through arithmetic with the resigned concentration of a person doing something necessary that they do not love. Another has abandoned the pretense of homework and is drawing in a notebook in the way children draw when left peacefully to their own devices, without purpose, without self-consciousness, with a fullness of attention that adults rarely manage for anything. The radio murmurs from the shelf, low enough to be present and not so loud as to need managing. The furnace air moves softly through the grate near the baseboard. The kitchen, at this hour, is running at 2 speeds simultaneously. At one end it is slow and settled. Children and warmth and the low domestic murmur of an ordinary evening assembling itself. At your end it is moving, always moving, hands occupied with the next step before the current one is quite finished. This doubleness is one of the things that makes the supper hour look simpler from outside than it is from within. The warmth is real. The busyness is equally real. They coexist in the same room without contradiction and without acknowledgement, because that is simply the nature of this hour. And the evening, in a Canadian winter, is serious. Not solemn, not joyless, only serious in the way that matters. It is the meal that must not fail. Breakfast can be quick. Lunch can be private and modest, and barely ceremonial, but supper is the family's shared daily ceremony, the meal at which everyone returns to the same table, the meal that says the day had a shape and that shape had an ending. And here we are, inside and warm and together. Its failure would mean more than hunger. It would mean something went wrong with the day, in a way that goes beyond food. And you feel this without ever quite saying it, so you keep moving even when you are tired. The onions go into the hot fat in the pan and immediately begin their transformation, softening, sweetening, going translucent at the edges and faintly gold in the center. The smell changes the quality of the air in the whole kitchen. This is the smell that children will remember, in the specific and involuntary way that smell carries memory longer than almost any other sense. They will smell onions softening in a pan 40 years from now, and be briefly inexplicably here in this kitchen at this table, on a winter evening when they were small enough to do arithmetic with a pencil that needed sharpening. They will not know why the feeling comes. It will not occur to them that it has anything to do with the person who made it happen. You know this, in some form, without quite putting it into language. The meat goes in beside the onions when the pan is ready, and the sound of it, that confident, immediate sizzle, fills the kitchen with something richer and more substantial. The children look up briefly, drawn by the sound and what it promises, then return to their work. Your husband's arrival is not far off now. You can feel the evening beginning to tighten toward that moment. The front door. The cold air admitted briefly. The heavier sounds of an adult removing outdoor clothing. The shift in the house's social atmosphere when the absent member returns, and the day becomes officially assembled. The table you are working at is not yet the table the family will eat at. That transformation is still ahead. Right now it holds raw vegetables in their bowls, the wrapper from the butcher's parcel, a dish towel folded for use, a measuring cup, the salt cellar brought close, the pepper tin with its worn label. It holds the meal in progress, which looks nothing like the meal completed. And this gap between in progress and completed is itself a form of domestic knowledge that lives almost entirely in the woman standing at the center of it. The knowledge of how much time remains, what each component needs, in what sequence things must come together, what can wait, and what cannot. The casserole dish goes into the oven. The timer, if there is one, is set. If not, the clock on the wall becomes the timer, and you carry the count in the back of your mind as you move on to the next thing, bread to slice, if there is good bread, the table to be properly set before the family gathers around it, the children's after-school clutter to be gently moved from the supper end without causing complaint, a napkin at each place, the everyday dishes, not the good ones, not on a Wednesday, not when it is stew and bread and perhaps canned fruit for dessert, but the everyday dishes wiped and set with an exactness that is its own form of care. You straighten the fork at your husband's place. It is a small gesture, wholly unnecessary. The fork will eat no differently for being straight. And yet the gesture is made because the table set with care says something the table set carelessly cannot say, and what it says matters to you even when it matters to no one else in the room. The smell in the kitchen deepens and becomes unmistakably supper. It fills the house now, not only the kitchen. It goes down the hallway and touches the edges of the rooms where the children are. And it says without words that the evening is progressing correctly, that someone held the line from morning to night, that the house is what it is supposed to be. In families and houses like this one, in winters like this one, that smell is one of the most honest expressions of domestic love available. Not because it is the only expression, but because it is the daily one, the repeated one, the one that happens regardless of mood or fatigue, or whether the week has been manageable or not. You lift the pot lid and let a breath of steam rise around your face. Almost ready. Not quite. And outside the front door, the sound of boots on the step. When everyone is finally seated, the kitchen table changes its character one more time. It is no longer your work surface, or the children's after-school harbour, or the afternoon's mending bench. It becomes a stage, not in the theatrical sense, not in the sense of performance for an audience of strangers, but in the everyday domestic sense of a place where a family presents itself to itself, where the day is concluded. where the household, scattered since morning into its separate orbits, reassembles into something that can be called, without exaggeration, a whole. Plates are set before everyone. Steam rises from the casserole dish at the center of the table. The lamp throws its warm circle onto everything within reach of the table, and leaves everything beyond it in a softer dark. Outside the windows the night has settled completely. No light left in the sky, just the porch lamp catching the edge of snowfall that has started again at some point in the last hour, and the occasional distant sound of a car making its way along the slushed street. Inside the ring of lamplight, there is the passing of the bread, the lifting of the ladle, the particular sound of family at table, spoons against china sleeves brushed back, chairs accommodating the settling weight of people who have been on their feet since early morning. You sit down at last. Not all at once, and not entirely. Part of you remains standing in spirit for the whole meal, monitoring, attending, registering the small signals of what is needed before it is asked for. Someone will want more before the serving dish has made its way around. Someone is picking things out of the stew in a way that will need addressing. Not loudly, but clearly. The bread is running low, and there may or may not be enough for everyone to take seconds if they want them. The child with the slow appetite has already begun a story rather than eating, and the story will need to pause while the eating catches up. Your own first mouthful is taken after everyone else has begun. This is not a rule anyone made. It has the quality of a habit so deep it has become invisible, absorbed into the body's sense of how a supper hour proceeds. You eat when you eat, with one part of your attention turned outward toward the table and one part turned inward toward the taste itself, checking not for pleasure first, but for rightness. Is the salt sufficient? Is the meat as tender as you hoped? Is there enough for second helpings if they are wanted? Or will you need to discourage them discreetly before the dish empties in a way that leaves someone looking at the bottom? Conversation moves in the modest, familiar channels of a family evening. What the school day held, how the roads were coming home, whether old Mr. Kenting's second, Paulson's car was in his driveway. It has been gone 3 days, and someone on the street mentioned his chest has been bad this winter, whether the church furnace was properly seen to after last Sunday's complaint about the cold in the back pews, whether Saturday's skating will happen, or whether the temperature is working against it. Nothing in this conversation is historic. Nothing will appear in any record that outlasts the people who spoke it, and yet an enormous amount of social life is contained in it, the maintenance of connection, the daily accounting of shared territory, the small reassurances and small provocations by which families remain in real contact rather than merely proximate. You listen while serving. You talk while watching. This is the particular divided attention of the woman at the center of a family meal. The conversation carried on at one level of consciousness, while another level continues its housekeeping work of monitoring the table, the children's posture and mood, the state of the serving dishes, the clock, the progress of the meal toward its natural end. It is not that you are absent from the conversation. You are entirely present in it, but you are present in it from a slightly different position than anyone else at the table, a position that combines participation with stewardship in a way that is difficult to describe because it is so continuous and so unremarked. Manners are attended to. Not harshly, not with the self-conscious formality that would make the table feel like a test rather than a meal, but consistently. Because manners at table are one of the household's ongoing projects, one of the forms of formation that happen in this room over the long run of years rather than in any single moment. Sit properly. Use the napkin. Wait until everyone has been served before beginning. Do not reach across. Finish what is on your plate, or at least a fair portion of it. Thank your father for bringing in the milk. Ask whether anyone else would like the last piece of bread before taking it yourself. These instructions, repeated at enough suppers over enough winters, will eventually need to be said less often. Eventually, they will simply be the way the children sit at tables for the rest of their lives without remembering who taught them or when. The table also holds, beneath all the warmth and conversation and the good smell of supper, the quiet social register of the household's position in the world. Not announced, not discussed, simply present, the way furniture is present, assumed, background, revealing itself in details rather than declarations. It is present in whether the tablecloth is on or not, and which tablecloth it is, in the condition and matching of the dishes, in whether the meal includes something that could be called a treat, or whether it is entirely practical, nourishing and sufficient but without anything that might be called abundance, in the way portions are sized, generous toward the children and the husband, somewhat smaller toward yourself, in the allocation of care that goes unremarked but is seen, in whether there is dessert, and what kind of dessert, and whether the dessert was made or opened from a tin, and whether the tin, if it is a tin, is displayed or discreetly removed from sight before serving. All of this is legible, not always consciously, not as deliberate reading. But families are intimate observers of their own conditions, and children especially are sensitive to what the table is saying in languages that have no words. They absorb over the accumulated suppers of childhood a sense of what their household is and what it is not, what can be taken for granted and what represents effort, whether plenty is real and where it is managed carefully to resemble plenty. They will carry this knowledge with them out of the house and into their own adult kitchens without quite knowing they are carrying it. A child mentions that someone at school has a new pair of figure skates. The remark is offered in the simple reporting tone of the very young, a fact about the world, noted without obvious agenda, dropped into the table's conversation the way a stone is dropped into water. The ripples, however, spread farther than the stone intends. You hear the remark from your particular position at the table and feel its weight precisely. You know what it costs, a good pair of figure skates. You know what it would mean to provide them. You know also what it means to not provide them. And you know the particular sadness of a child absorbing that knowledge, while trying not to show it. You say something measured, something true and also kind. Different families have different arrangements. New things are not always the most important things. Perhaps in the spring, when the money is a little clearer, the child nods and eats another spoonful of stew, and the moment passes, because children are resilient in exactly these moments in a way that is both wonderful and faintly heartbreaking. The conversation moves on. The breadbasket goes around again. But the remark sits with you for the rest of the meal. In the part of your mind that never quite stops working, it joins the list of things requiring thought. The coat that is still adequate but will not be adequate much longer. The winter boots that have started to leak at the left sole. The skates that would mean so much and cost more than the week can offer. This is the emotional labor that no column in the household account captures, the constant low-level awareness of what is needed against what is possible. The management of hope and limitation across a kitchen table without letting the management show in a way that would sadden or alarm the people you are managing it for. By the time the casserole dish is lighter and the bread is mostly gone and the children are showing the loosening restlessness of people whose hunger has been properly addressed, the meal is winding toward its ending. There is dessert. Canned peaches in a nice dish or rice pudding if you had the afternoon for it. Or the last of a cake from earlier in the week, sliced thin enough to go around with a little leftover for tomorrow's lunchboxes. It is not extravagant. It is also not nothing. It is the small sweetness that closes the meal on a note that says, the table wanted to give you something beyond the necessary. Even tonight, even in February. The children are excused. Their chairs scrape back. They carry their own plates to the counter. This is required, this small contribution to the aftermath. And then they are released into the evening, the living room, the homework not quite finished, the book, waiting, the warmth of a house that has been heated all day and holds it well into the night. Your husband lingers a moment longer, a second cup of tea perhaps, or the newspaper brought from the other room while you begin to clear. The table between you has held the day's communication, all its practical exchange, and its careful silences, and its ordinary tenderness. He may say the meal was good. He may not. The saying or not saying carries different weight depending on the week, the day, the accumulated weather of the marriage. But you know from the way the evening has settled, from the sound of the house, from the simple orderly fact of everyone fed and warm and present, that the meal was good. You made it good. The clearing begins. After supper comes the portion of the evening that appears in no one's later memory as a separate event, though it occupies so much of the living of it, the clearing away, the rinsing, the scraping of serving dishes, the return of the kitchen from the communal space of the shared meal back into the working space of the woman who manages it. Families remember sitting at table. They remember the food, the warmth, a conversation that mattered, a scolding that still stings, a particular winter evening that for some unaccountable reason retained its shape in memory while 100 identical evenings dissolved. But the woman who managed the meal often remembers what followed, the part that happens after everyone has pushed their chair back and drifted toward the rest of the evening, leaving behind a table of plates and glasses and serving dishes and the accumulated evidence of another family supper concluded. The table empties in stages. First, the children carry their plates as required. Then, the serving dishes are lifted and assessed. How much remains, what can be saved, what should be covered and refrigerated and become tomorrow's something, what is too little to keep, but too much to waste, without thinking about it for a moment. The bread that is left goes back into the bread box, if it is still good enough. The butter dish goes back into the refrigerator. The salt and pepper return to their place. These movements are so habitual that they have become almost below the threshold of conscious decision. The body knows the after-supper choreography so well that the mind can be elsewhere while it proceeds. You stand at the sink. The dishwater is hot, which is a small pleasure, though the heat will also roughen the skin on your hands more than the cold air outside does. And by morning, your knuckles will feel the combination. You rinse plates under the tap before stacking them in the soapy water, because there is a right order to dishes and the order matters. Glasses first while the water is cleanest, then plates, then cutlery, then the heavier serving things and the pots last, when the water can be freshened. This hierarchy was not taught in a class. It was learned in kitchens, your mother's kitchen, your aunt's, perhaps a summer in a kitchen, not your own, where the woman who ran it had very specific opinions about the proper sequence of dishwashing, opinions she shared without hesitation. Through the kitchen window the night is fully dark and fully present. The glass shows you the room reflected back, the lamp, the table, your own back, the movement of your hands above the sink. Beyond the reflection there is only the dark, and somewhere in the dark the snow continuing to fall in the slow, patient way of snow that intends to be present by morning. The houses on either side of yours are visible in small, warm fragments. A lit window, the particular glow of a television set behind someone's front curtains. The neighborhood is settled into its evening, separate and private in the way of neighborhoods at night. All the common warmth of daylight communication withdrawn behind closed doors. You wash and rinse and stack. The drainer fills. Perhaps one of the children has been sent to dry, or perhaps they have drifted beyond recall, and you will dry yourself later, or leave the dishes to air dry if the evening has consumed too much of the patience required for instruction. The kitchen slowly reassembles itself around the sink. The table cleared of the meal shows its working surface again. The faint marks of the day's accumulated use. The particular geography of a table that has been a desk and a workbench and a serving surface and a family gathering place in the span of 16 hours. The leftovers are handled with care. This is another form of expertise that lives quietly in the muscles of women who have managed households through years of real economy. The remainder of the stew transferred to a covered bowl, its color already deepening as it cools, its flavor improving as it does. Tomorrow's lunch. Tomorrow's reheated supper if the week is particularly demanding. The base of something new if there is time and imagination for it. The last of the bread checked and rewrapped. The serving dish scraped clean, because the scrapings are not nothing. They are a spoonful of good flavored liquid that can be added to tomorrow's pot without anyone knowing or needing to know. Waste is not acceptable, not because anyone will inspect your garbage pail. Though in a small town such things are noticed in the general, not the specific, in the aggregate rather than the incident, not from anything so external, from something internal. From the understanding, built over years of managing a household against a budget with real edges, that food represents more than appetite. It represents money spent, time spent, the planning that went into its purchase and its preparation. To waste it casually would feel like a disrespect to all of that, to the work, to the money, to the family the food was meant to sustain. So you save, you cover, you label in your mind, if not on paper. You arrange the refrigerator shelf with the economy of someone who has made this small cold space yield as much as it possibly can, week after week, through a long winter, without ever quite running out of something essential. When the kitchen is restored to order, you allow yourself one more cup of tea. You bring it to the table. This is a different quality of sitting from the noon hours cup. Less solitary, less fully yours, because the house is still awake around you, still populated. Your husband is in the living room with the paper or the television. The children are in bed, or in the process of being so, their voices occasionally audible through the ceiling as they conduct the small negotiations and delays of the going to bed hour. The house is not quiet, but the kitchen is quieter than it has been all day, and in that relative quiet you sit with the tea and allow the day to settle through you. This is when the body's accounting begins, not in words, not in formal review. Simply in the sensation of the day's residue, the particular tiredness of the back when a great deal of standing has been done, the roughness of the hands, the dull satisfaction that exists somewhere between fatigue and completion. You did the things that were required. The family was fed. The house held. The table served its purposes in all the configurations the day demanded of it, and those purposes were many and none of them was small, though none of them was grand either. There may be lunches still to prepare, if the morning will be early or the bread runs out overnight, in the way it sometimes does when a child has helped themselves to a slice before bed. It is worth slicing now and wrapping now and setting the lunch boxes in their place on the counter where they will be impossible to forget in the morning's rush. The table receives this last evening work without complaint, the breadboard brought close, the knife familiar, the wax paper torn in the practiced way, small sandwiches made with the economy of someone who has made thousands of small sandwiches and knows exactly how much filling is enough and how much is waste. You push the lunch boxes to the edge of the counter. You wipe the board. The table, wiped one final time this evening, is clear, and the kitchen around it has the particular piece of a room that has done its work for the day and been restored to readiness for tomorrow. Not empty, not cold, not strange, only waiting, in the patient way of rooms that know they will be needed again very soon, for the next morning's first footfall, the next kettle's first click, the next cup set down on its familiar surface. You turn off the overhead light. The lamp near the refrigerator stays on for a little while yet, a small light for a small remaining portion of the evening, enough to navigate by without disturbing the settled quiet of the house. You take your tea toward the other room. The kitchen table stands in the half-dark behind you, ready for tomorrow. Later in the evening, when the children are in bed and the house has settled into its separate nighttime presences, the television speaking low in the other room, a door closed softly somewhere, the furnace psyching on with its familiar underground hum, you find yourself at the kitchen table again. Not because you plan to be there, because the kitchen is where you end up, in the way of people whose days are organized around a central place. You come back to move a cup, or to check that the burner is off, or to look at the grocery list one more time before the week gets away from you, and in coming back you settle, briefly, into the chair that knows your weight best, and the table receives you without ceremony. This hour has a quality unlike any other in the day. The obligations are not gone, they are never gone, but they are at a lower frequency now, a hum rather than a voice. The immediate demands of the day have been met. What remains is a kind of inwardness that the earlier hours rarely allow. Not peace exactly, not in the dramatic sense of peace as arrival, more like the gradual cessation of noise, the noise of need, of scheduling, of the constant small outwardness of domestic life. until what is left is something closer to the sound of your own thinking. You may have sewing in your lap, a hem that wants attention, or a button replacing, or simply the companionable occupation of something in the hands while the mind moves on its own. Or you may have brought the magazine that has been sitting under the telephone table since last Tuesday, read in increments of 5 minutes, whenever 5 minutes could be found. An article here, a recipe there. A photograph studied with a comfortable leisure that the daylight hours almost never offer. Or there may be nothing at all but the tea growing cool beside your elbow and the particular stillness of the room. The table beneath your forearms is the same table it has been all day. And yet, it is different now. At this hour, it is not the breakfast table, or the budget table, or the mending bench, or the supper stage. It is simply the surface beneath your arms, the thing your hands rest on. The center of a room that has held you through a long day and is now holding you gently in its last moments. And in that familiarity, in the particular temperature of the laminate and the slight give of the table's surface where years of use have softened it, in the sound it makes when you shift your cup, there is a form of intimacy that is difficult to name because it has never quite needed a name. Memory finds its way in through the quiet, not in any ordered or deliberate way. Not the way you might sit down to remember, in the purposeful sense of reaching backward for something specific, more in the way of association, the smell of tea, the particular quality of winter night quiet, the weight of fatigue in the shoulders. That opens a door in the mind that was not consciously reached for. You think of another kitchen, your mother's most likely, or your grandmother's if she was a presence in your early life close enough to have left a kitchen-shaped impression. A table that may have been larger or smaller, covered in a different cloth or no cloth at all, lit by a different kind of lamp or by the last light from a window that faced a different direction entirely, but with the same quality of late evening occupation. The same woman at the center of it, older than you were then and perhaps younger than you are now. The same hands, finding their way around the same tasks. You learned to fold a tea towel from someone. It seems a trivial thing to have been taught. It seems the sort of thing that absorbs itself from the atmosphere of a household, the way accent absorbs, the way the habit of grace before meals absorbs or fails to absorb depending on the household. But you know you were taught. You know because you fold it a particular way, the particular thirds, the particular alignment of the corners. That is not universal, not the only way, and that when you see it done differently, it registers faintly as a difference rather than simply a method. Someone's hands showed your hands. Some repetition in a kitchen, not this one, made the gesture yours. And what else did those hands teach, that you now perform without quite knowing you are performing it? The way you test whether the oven is holding temperature by how the door feels at the handle before you open it. The way you always taste before adding the second salt. The way you scrape the bowl with the spoon in a particular motion that leaves almost nothing behind. The way you never open a new tin of something until the current one is finished. A habit so embedded it feels like common sense rather than learned economy. The way you wrap leftovers in wax paper rather than leaving them bare in the dish because something was said once in some kitchen about what air does to food overnight. These gestures are inheritance, passed along without ceremony, without announcement. Through the simple medium of proximity and repetition. You lived in kitchens and you watched women working in them, and the watching became doing, and the doing became habit, and habit has become by now so settled in the body that it would take conscious effort to do any of it differently. This is how most of what women know about domestic life has always been transmitted, not through instruction, exactly not through formal teaching, but through the long-form education of being present in a room where someone who knows is working. You think about this at the table, in the quiet, not with bitterness, not with the sense of having been constrained by an inheritance you did not choose. More with something like recognition, the recognition that what you do in this kitchen is not only yours, that it connects through the chain of hands in kitchens and ordinary days to something much longer and wider than any individual life, that the woman who will eventually sit at her own kitchen table late at night, your daughter, if you have one, or the daughter of someone who knew you, will carry, in the particular angle of her wrist when she wipes a surface, some trace of this room, This table, these repeated gestures. The house around you is very quiet now. The television in the other room has gone off. You can hear the furnace working below the floor. The wind has come up a little outside. And the window in the back door shifts faintly in its frame, a sound you know so well from so many winters that it has become simply part of the texture of the house, the voice of winter doing its ordinary business against the walls. Upstairs, a child turns in bed. The creak of the floorboard above the kitchen is the specific creak of that bed being shifted, and you know it without needing to place it. You look at your hands resting on the table. They are not the hands of the woman in the magazine. They are not smooth or ornamented or at leisure in the photographed way of women's hands in advertisements. They are capable hands, hands that have been used all day and will be used again tomorrow. Hands that know their way around this kitchen in full dark if they had to. Hands that have, over the years of working in this room, accumulated a kind of knowledge that no one has ever thought to call knowledge. You turn them over once, looking. Then you pick up the cup. The tea is cold. You stand and carry the cup to the sink and rinse it and set it in the drainer for morning. Outside the window, the snow has paused. The yard is very still and very white. The fence carries its load of quiet snow. The clothesline is a thin, dark line against white, reaching from the house to the post at the back of the lot. The sky has a winter night luminosity, not light exactly, only a certain paleness where cloud reflects what glow the town below it gives off. You stand at the window for a moment. Then you turn back to the room. The table stands in its place, clear and familiar and without ceremony. It has been today what it always is, the centre of the household's life. Unremarkable, indispensable, holding the shape of the day in its surface without announcement, without record, without need of either. You turn off the last light. There are evenings in a Canadian winter when the cold makes itself felt not as weather but as presence. It presses at the windows. It works at the door frames where the weather stripping has aged past its best. It makes itself known in the thin places of the house, the corner of the back bedroom that never quite reaches comfortable. The bathroom floor first thing in the morning, the particular chill of a concrete step if the door is left open a second too long. It is not dramatic cold, not blizzard cold, not the newsworthy kind of cold. It is the persistent, patient cold of a southern Ontario February that has been in place for weeks now and intends to remain in place for several more, and it shapes the interior of the house in ways both physical and atmospheric. The kitchen holds against it best. It always has. The kitchen is where the stove burns and the kettle is always recently boiled, and the oven puts out its slow, steady heat over the course of a cooking afternoon. The refrigerator motor adds its small warmth. The people gathered there add their larger warmth. The room is built to be the warmest room in the house, and in winter it earns that position more than in any other season. On an evening like this one, when supper is done and the dishes are put away, and the children have been settled toward bed with varying degrees of cooperation, the kitchen becomes a gathering place again, this time for the last and softest portion of the family's day. Not always, not every night, but often enough in winter that it is a recognizable pattern, a reliable turn toward warmth when the rest of the house has grown cool. Perhaps your husband brings the newspaper to the kitchen table. Perhaps a child, not yet ready to be done with the evening, reappears with a book and a request to stay up a little longer, and you make a decision based on the particular quality of the day, whether it has been a good day or a hard day, whether the child looks genuinely not sleepy or is simply performing wakefulness, in the hope that company will be permitted, and sometimes you say yes and sometimes you say no, and either way the kitchen table receives the outcome. Perhaps there is sewing to finish, or a letter to write, or the week's accounts to reconcile in the small notebook kept in the kitchen drawer. The lamp gives the table its particular evening character. At this hour, the table is not the bright functional surface of the morning, or the working surface of the afternoon. It is warm and slightly amber and a little softer at its edges, the way things look in lamplight, that is close enough to be generous. The chrome trim catches the lamp's warmth and gives it back differently than it gives back daylight. The tablecloth, if there is one this evening, has the slight dishevelled quality of a cloth that has been through a full day. Not dirty, not needing to be changed, but bearing the small evidence of life lived upon it, the pressed flat spot where the pepper tin always sits, the slight rumpling from chairs pulled close and pushed back again. Outside, the snow has returned. Not urgently, the soft, steady way it fell this morning and on many mornings before it this winter. It accumulates against the back step. It builds along the windowsill with that particular patient geometry of snow against a horizontal surface. The clothesline, empty and dark, collects a thin white line along its length. The yard below is going from grey to white again as the new layer covers the old. By morning, the path to the garage will need clearing, and the front walk, and the step. This is simply winter. This is simply what the season asks. Inside, the table holds the household's evening. A child's head may be bent over a picture book at one end, the serious, absorbed reading of a child who has only recently discovered that books contain worlds and is still faintly astonished by this discovery. Your husband's newspaper makes its particular sound of pages being folded back, settled, adjusted. Your own hands are occupied with whatever the evening has brought to them. Sewing perhaps, or the writing of a shopping list for the coming week, or the careful mending of something that did not get addressed during the afternoon's basket. The radio speaks from its shelf, giving the late news or a program that the evening prefers to not require full attention. The table accommodates all of this without hierarchy. That is one of its central qualities. This lack of hierarchy, this democratic acceptance of whatever the house brings to it. Child's book and husband's newspaper and woman's sewing occupy the same surface without competition, each at its own end or its own angle, each lit by the same lamp, each warmed by the same kitchen air. The table does not rank these uses. It does not indicate that one occupant matters more than another, or that one purpose deserves more of its surface than another. It simply holds. Winter makes this gathering feel more necessary than it does in other seasons. Summer has its loosening, screen doors opening onto warm evenings, children sent outside after supper, the whole house relaxing into a different relationship with its walls and limits. But February in southern Ontario is not a loosening month. It is a month of interiors. The cold outside makes the warmth inside feel earned and particular. It makes the lamplight seem more significant than it is in longer lit months. It makes the sound of a furnace working below the floor a form of assurance, and it makes the gathering of family around a table at the end of a winter day feel less like routine and more like, not celebration, that would be too large a word, more like recognition, the simple daily recognition that the warmth has been maintained and the people are here and the evening is holding. The child at the end of the table yawns enormously. A yawn so whole-bodied that it takes over the face and the hands and requires a moment of recovery. You watch this from the corner of your attention and say, "Not yet," in the tone of a person who has given this particular latitude and knows its boundaries. The child returns to the book. You return to the sewing. Your husband turns a page. The furnace speaks below the floor. The snow falls past the window in slow, uncounted quantities. This is not the life that anyone photographs. It is not the Christmas table or the birthday moment or the Sunday afternoon when company came and the good dishes were used. It is the unremarkable Wednesday evening of a household doing what households do, keeping themselves alive and together and warm at a table that has no particular distinction except that it has been the center of this particular life for years. That centeredness is not nothing. It is, quietly, everything. There comes a point late in the evening when the kitchen clears itself down to essentials. The newspaper is folded and carried to the other room. The child has been taken to bed with the small ritual of that. The glass of water, the tucking in the light left on. A moment, and then off. The murmur of something reassuring against whatever nighttime worry has surfaced tonight. Coats have been hung properly for morning. The lunchboxes are set. The counter is clear. And the table, which has held so much today, stands in a state of near-emptiness that reveals it more clearly than the fullness of its use ever quite does. A fruit bowl, perhaps. The sugar bowl that is never put away because it is always needed tomorrow. The salt cellar returned to its place. A folded newspaper section left for morning. Maybe a glass of water set out against a middle-of-the-night thirst. These ordinary objects on the cleared table have a quality of stillness that the day's activity never quite allowed. Not stillness as absence, but stillness as the natural conclusion of motion, the way a river looks when it has passed through rapids and entered a slow, deep, quiet section downstream. You stand at the edge of the table for a moment. Your hand rests on the back of a chair. The kitchen around you smells of the day, dishwater and stew, and the particular mixture of warmth and winter cold that never entirely resolves in a house with old windows and a furnace that does its best. The lamp is the only light on now, and it makes the room feel smaller and more particular than it does in the overhead light of the working hours. Every surface in this light has a slight warmth that the same surface does not have in daylight. The table's chrome edge catches the lamp and returns it softly. The floor shows the path of the day's traffic in the slight compression of the linoleum near the stove, the refrigerator, the sink. You look at the room as though seeing it from a small distance, not from outside yourself. You are too tired for that kind of philosophical remove, but from the distance that comes at the end of a long day when the body has slowed enough for the eyes to register something other than the next task. The kitchen is modest. You know this. It has never been otherwise. The linoleum is worn at the places of most use. The window frames have been repainted once and are beginning to show their age again. The curtains are clean and practical, not chosen for beauty so much as for the right amount of light and the right amount of privacy, which is its own form of beauty in a room that must be lived in rather than looked at. Yet the room holds something that no amount of modesty diminishes. It holds the day, all of it, from the first footfall in the pre-dawn dark to this last standing moment at the edge of the cleared table. The breakfast managed and the children launched and the budget calculated and the groceries chosen with care and brought home through the cold and put away with foresight. The noon tea and its brief solitude, the mending done and the garments restored to usefulness. The children received back from the world and fed and settled and heard. The supper prepared and served, and the table set with its small, uncelebrated exactness. The dishes washed, the leftovers saved. The kitchen returned to order. None of this was asked about today. No one said at any point in the passing of this day, "How is it going? What does the work feel like? Is there enough help? Is it too much? Do you ever wish the kitchen table were someone else's responsibility for once?" These questions do not arise in ordinary domestic life in 1960. They do not arise, not because the people around you are cruel. They are not cruel. They are your family. They are the people you are feeding and caring for and choosing. But because the work is so embedded in the architecture of the household that it's become effectively invisible, the better it is done, the more invisible it is. The meal that appeared without difficulty appeared because of a great deal of difficulty. The house that runs smoothly is running on effort. The table that stands clear at the end of the evening was cleared by someone. That someone is you. And in the quiet of this late moment, with the kitchen lamp on and the house settled around you, this knowledge does not require an audience. It does not require acknowledgement, though acknowledgement would not be unwelcome. It is simply the knowledge that carries its own weight, the weight of competence, of persistence, of a day fully met. You have been, today, the person this household needed. Not heroically, not dramatically, ordinarily, continuously, without interruption and without the luxury of stepping out of the role when the role became heavy. This is what women's history looks like from the inside. Not the history that announces itself in archives and dates and public speech, the history that happens at kitchen tables in the spaces between meals, in the folding of tea towels and the stretching of grocery money, and the mending of mittens and the tending of the particular emotional temperature of a household through a long winter day. It is history made of repetition rather than event. of maintenance rather than change, of love expressed through the daily labor of keeping people warm and fed and held. The table stands in its ordinary dignity. No one will record it. No one who passes this house on the street will think about it. The world outside has its own vast machinery of significance, and the kitchen table of a modest Ontario home in 1960 does not appear in its accounting. Yet here in this room, at this surface, an entire life has been organized and expressed and sustained today. A family has been held together. Children have been prepared for the world. The household has met its obligations to itself and to the standards of the community it lives within. All of it. Through this table. All of it. You press your palm flat against the surface for a moment. The kind of gesture that belongs to a body saying something the mouth has no words for. The table is cool where the lamp does not reach it, and warmer where it does. Solid, permanent in the way that only objects of daily use become permanent, worn into the body's memory so thoroughly that to imagine life without them requires an actual effort of imagination. Then you lift your hand. Turn off the lamp. Walk through the dark kitchen that your feet know without needing eyes, toward the hall, toward the rest of the house. The table stands behind you in the dark, ready for morning. Now, the night deepens around the house, and the house itself seems to breathe differently. The furnace, faithful through the whole cold day, works at its low, steady business in the basement, sending warmth up through the registers in slow, dry pulses. The pipes tick once or twice as the temperature outside drops toward its nighttime floor. The windows, already dark for hours, deepen into their most complete darkness now. No light from the street, no movement visible through the frosted glass, only the faint ambient glow that any inhabited town throws upward into a cloudy winter sky. You have found your way to bed. The day is behind you in the way that only sleep can fully accomplish. Not resolved, not finished in the sense of complete, but set down. Tomorrow will ask for the same things and more. We'll present the same table in the same morning and the same small cascade of need that begins before the kettle has boiled. But that is tomorrow. Right now there is only the dark and the sound of the house settling into itself, and the particular weight of a body that has worked from before dawn to past nightfall and is now, at last, permitted to rest. Across the hall, a child breathes in sleep, that slow, uncomplicated breathing of children at rest, who fall into sleep without negotiation, without the long thoughts that delay adult sleep, without the backward glance at the day that a woman who has managed a household all its waking hours finds it difficult not to perform even now. Even in the dark, you lie for a moment and let the day pass through you in its final accounting. The scale of it, not the drama of it. There was no drama today, nothing that would be called remarkable by any external measure, nothing that will leave a mark in any record that outlasts the people involved, only the scale of the ordinary, the number of times your hands moved from one thing to the next. The number of small decisions made, the number of needs met and remade and met again, the number of times the table was cleared and reused and wiped and loaded and cleared again, marking the hours of the day in its particular way, the way sundials mark hours with shadow, and beneath the scale, the texture, and beneath the scale, the cold of the floor at 5 in the morning and the warmth of the kitchen by 6, the smell of the children's wet coats and the smell of the stew and the particular smell of clean laundry folded in a cold room, the weight of the grocery bags against the cold air and the satisfaction of the provisions put away in their right places, the sound of the mending basket and the sound of children returning, and the sound of the table loaded with supper things and the sound of the kitchen in its late quietness, the refrigerator and the clock and the furnace and nothing else. These textures do not announce themselves as significant. They are not significant in any public accounting of the day. They are significant only to the person who lived them, and perhaps to the family who was held in their warmth without knowing it. Children who eat a well-made meal at a set table in a clean kitchen, without thinking about how any of it came to be, there are children whose lives have been shaped in ways they cannot yet measure by the invisible competence of the woman who made it happen. They will know this, if they come to know it at all, much later, when they are standing at their own tables, making their own meals, discovering in themselves gestures they did not know they had inherited. For now, they sleep. Outside, the town is entirely quiet. Snow has stopped falling. The street holds its new white covering in the specific stillness of winter after snowfall, when every surface is smoothed and every sound is softened, and the world seems briefly to have agreed to a pause. The houses on the block sit in their particularity: brick and clapboard and bungalow. Each with its story behind the curtains, each with its own kitchen table holding the residue of its own day, its own crumbs and cup rings and the marks of the particular lives around it. From the outside, they all look much the same. Modest, decent, maintained with care, offering their lit windows to the dark street in the early evening and their dark windows to the late night. From the outside, there is no way to see the full weight of what was carried in each of them today. The calculations at the kitchen table. The bread stretched to last through the week, the mending done after the children were settled. The supper made and served and cleared away without comment. The listening, the managing, the 100 small adjustments between what was wanted and what was possible, made so quietly and so constantly that they had become as natural as breathing. In this house, the kitchen table stands in the dark, the sugar bowl is on it, the salt cellar, a folded note for morning, the fruit bowl with its 3 apples and a late orange brought home from the grocer this week. These objects in the dark are the same objects they are in daylight, only more still, more concentrated in their ordinariness. They hold no mystery. They offer no symbolism beyond themselves. They are simply the objects of a household at rest, gathered on a surface that has known the hands of the woman who keeps this house for enough years that it has taken on something of her shape. The cloth worn smooth where she wipes it most, the chrome edge at exactly the angle of her habitual lean. This table is not important to history. It will not be preserved. No one will stand in front of it in a museum and read a small card describing its significance. No one will write it into the record of the country, and yet it is the table at which an ordinary woman has today conducted an ordinary life with a skill and a patience and a love that required everything she had and received in return. The kind of recognition that ordinary domestic life mostly gives, the knowledge internal and quiet and belonging to no one but her that she did the day well, that she held the household, that she was the warmth and the cold. Let the table rest now. Let the kitchen stand in its dark and quiet, the lamp off, the stove cold, the morning still hours away. Let the house settle into the deep midwinter night and release the day it has been holding. Let the woman who moved through these rooms from before dawn to past dark lie down at last in the dark and feel the full permission of stillness. She was here all day. She kept the fire. She fed the people who needed feeding and mended the things that were coming apart and held the line between what the week could bear and what it could not. And she did it all from one table at the centre of one modest kitchen in one small Ontario town in the winter of 1960. And it was not nothing. It was never nothing. It was never nothing. It was everything that made this house a home. Sleep now. Let the snow fall, outside, in silence. Let the furnace work, below, in darkness. Let the table stand, in the still kitchen, gathering nothing now but the faint light that the winter night lends to white surfaces through frosted glass. And let the morning, when it comes, find this house ready. It will be. It always is. Good night.